So I just saw Blade Runner 2049, which is the latest film from Denis Villeneuve. And of course it's the sequel to Ridley Scott's masterpiece, Blade Runner. And I know everyone's already talking about this. My turn to talk about this. Normally I wouldn't talk about a movie like this because everyone is saying basically the same thing that I will be saying, and obviously that means I'm not saying anything new or different or fresh. But I loved this movie and I wanted to do a video about it because it's one of my favorite movies of the year. So why not talk about it? Come on.
Every civilization was built off the back of a disposable workforce. But I can only make so many.
So Blade Runner 2049 is basically a direct sequel taking place 30 years later. It's sort of a handing off of the baton, a soft reboot-esque film that's basically its own thing, which was great. The best part of this new Blade Runner movie is that it honestly almost works better as a standalone movie. There's a scene in the new one when he's talking to a man and the man says, "You saw Rachel for the first time and there was an instant connection and you knew that you loved her." And I was like, no, there wasn't. He hated her. It's obvious. He did not want to be in the same room as her. So in that regard, Blade Runner 2049 almost works better on its own. So if you haven't seen the original Blade Runner, I will say that it's not necessary, really, because there just isn't all that much going on in the original one. I know, cue the hate towards me, but I don't really appreciate the first one as much as almost everyone else does. That's what I appreciated more about this movie than the original, is that the character is far more complex than Harrison Ford was. The character here that Ryan Gosling plays is this very stoic, emotionless person that has outbursts of emotion that he can't control because he doesn't know how to handle situations that he's being put in this movie. He's never had to be put in these kind of situations before, and he just doesn't know how to handle them. And that is a really, really ingenious thing to do with this movie. It asks the question, how far can you go saying that this person's an android if they have these emotional responses? And it brings up this question of what defines human, what is humanity, and if the robots, if the androids have these human emotions and they can think and they can feel and they can process things on their own, isn't that humanity? And I realize that the first Blade Runner attempts to tackle this question, but it does it in the most ham-fisted, boring way, where Harrison Ford is just acting like a robot the entire movie, and then the robots have more humanity than he does. So it's not very subtle. And in this movie, it is quite a bit more subtle. It's more nuanced than the original, and that is something that Denis Villeneuve obviously brings to this movie. Every movie that he has made, he has brought nuance to, because he takes his time to establish things, to set tone, to set characters, to establish the world, to introduce you to what's happening, what the story is, and how it impacts the main characters. And that is sort of the worst part of the new 2049 for me, is that the first 45 minutes or so could have been paced a little bit better. There's a couple scenes where I was just like, okay, and cut, and cut, and cut, and it just kind of keeps going and going. And then Hans Zimmer's score here is probably the most present thing that took me out of the movie on a consistent, or more or less consistent basis. There's a couple times where his score is so thunderous and eardrum rocking that I had a hard time hearing characters talk. And in this movie, the dialogue's If you're going into this movie expecting an action, sci-fi, Star Wars-esque, Star Trek-esque film, you're going to be really disappointed, because this is a 3-hour-long sci-fi epic. This is a long movie, and I think the best aspect of this movie is again, the best aspect of the original, the visuals, the world building, the special effects, the cinematography especially. Oh, Roger Deakins has outdone himself again. I mean, you watch Prisoners, you watch Sicario, you watch any of his movies, and they're just, oh, they're beautiful. But 2049, Deakins has outdone himself. Just trust me. Every shot is... Denis Villeneuve notices the details, and he sort of calls attention to them without calling attention to them. He just creates these very lived-in, very realistic environments that you kind of want to explore on your own. And that is something that sci-fi will always have that other genres won't. It can create these lush worlds that you want to explore on your own, that you want to live in. And 2049 is no exception.
Happy birthday.
There is an order to things. That's what we do here. We keep order. The world is built on a wall that separates kind. Tell either side there's no wall, you bought a war.
The positives don't stop here either. The characters are so well defined and developed, and they have such meaningful motivations and interesting takes on things and such cool perspective on the reality that every character that you meet is interesting, and every character that you meet can tell has backstory. They have humanity to them, even if they're not humans. And it just makes every scene feel vibrant. It makes every scene feel important because you care about the characters and you care about the world and you care about the story, which I won't reveal too much about because in the first like 10 minutes the story just gets going and it's spoiler filled, but the story here is so perfect to follow up the original Blade Runner. It does this in such a masterful a masterful way. It's not as cool, but it makes more sense. I mean, I'm gushing. I love this movie. I think everything in this movie is nearly perfect, aside from those few things that I picked on earlier. And I would say, freaking go see this movie. Go see it twice. Go see it 3 times. If you have time, obviously. It's 3 hours long, almost. But not a second of it feels wasted, like completely wasted. Not 1 second of this movie is bad. Every moment in Blade Runner 2049 is so perfectly utilized and so masterfully crafted. Yeah, it's awesome. I love this movie. I don't want to spoil too much because I think it's worth just seeing. And it's one of those movies that you have to experience. Everyone called Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, a movie theater movie. And I'll say it is. But 2049 takes that and elevates it. This is not just a movie you have to see in movie theaters. This is a movie you have to see in Dolby Atmos 7.1 or whatever, surround sound, and on a huge IMAX screen. This is the epitome of movies, and it is one that I think will inspire people. But in the end, I do have to give this a rating, and taking into account the few negatives that I have, although they are slightly nitpicky, I realize, I'll give this one a 9. I don't like it as much as Prisoners. I think Prisoners is a masterpiece. I think that movie is untouchable in many ways, and it's not as good as Incendie, which was Denis Villeneuve's 2010 movie, but it is right up there with those two. It's excellent. It's one of the best movies of the year. It's one of the best sci-fi movies I've seen in maybe a decade. Yeah, so go see it. It's awesome. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.